Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're in your car, on your phone, or just sitting somewhere on your phone, because we do so much now, on our cell phones, or your computer or your iPads, because I've learned that iPads are back in. So I am April Albright. As my screen says, I am the legal director of Black Voters Matter, and I am joined by my comrade, who I get the pleasure of working alongside, Sister Ryan Wagner, who is everything policy for Black Voters Matter. She helps us know what's going on in these streets. And so the Policy Corner is really dedicated to making sure that we just don't hold this information in, that we actually have a space that we can come talk about policy in a way that we need to hear it, right? When I say we, I'm talking about Black folks. And even if you are not Black tonight, it still is relevant to you, right? Because we are allies. We are nation building together to make America become something that it has never been before. And tonight, what we're doing is making sure that America doesn't become what it has been, because what it has been is not a place where our voices as the Black community and many of you out here in this universe, right, this virtual universe, has been a part of. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about what we're talking about tonight, Ryan.
We are unpacking Project 2025, particularly in terms of the attacks on education, beyond the DEI bans, beyond the censorship, just really how this initiative harms Black communities, and also educating folks who may still not know what the purpose and what Project 2025 is.
Because we've been hearing it. It is the most Google search, right? This phrase of Project 2025. And we've all heard that it's bad. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad. And we've been on virtual calls and we've read articles, and we're all trying to get a grasp of, how bad is this thing? And so we wanted to make sure that there are people who are actually on the ground, right, doing their own policy work, and not just policy work. They're doing policy work and they are organizing in their communities, and they're already seeing the impact of some really bad policies in a lot of these southern states, that if, a certain conservative administration has their way, it may become nationalized, right, Ryan? I mean, quite frankly, it may become nationalized. And so we want to make sure that as we are going into this season, that we are very aware of what this doctrine means and how it has also found its way, some of it, particularly the topic tonight, because we know that, Trump has distanced himself from Project 2025. He has begun to say, and he released a statement recently that said, I don't know what this Project 2025 talk is all about. How is that related to me? I didn't draft it. I know nothing about it. But as you see on the screen right now, right, and we'll just let people check it out for yourself, right? An article was done in July by CNN talking and documenting about how many former staffers, of then President Trump actually played a role in creating the doctrine called Project 2025, produced by the Heritage Foundation. And so we just want to make sure that you're aware. So go to this article, because it does a really good job laying out the connections of Trump staffers and this doctrine, right? To see, is there any light of day? And be clear, the Heritage Foundation is the policy house for any conservative president, senator, congressperson, and even local people. They wheelhouse policy so that they can go to their legislatures or go to Congress, right? Or the governor's office or the president's office to get conservative policies changed. And in fact, Project 2025 is a letter to the next federal or executive branch that's led by a conservative president. And right now on the ticket for the conservative side is Donald Trump, right? And so read the article for yourself, because there are some really good connections. Really quickly, and then Ryan's going to take over. I worked for the Department of Education for 8 years as a supervising attorney in the Office for Civil Rights. And what that means, I worked under the Obama administration, and I also worked under Trump's administration. And while working with OCR under President Obama's administration, we had a very aggressive, right, strategy and policy to make sure that the rights of Black and brown and disabled and women were protected. And one of those things that we did was that we began to investigate race discrimination complaints based on discipline. And what we found was often 5-1 Black or brown students were being punished in comparison to their white counterparts. And as we dug into those investigations, what we learned was oftentimes for the same type of discipline. Black and brown students would be disciplined harsher, suspensions, expulsions, and their white counterparts would not. Those are the kind of things that the OCR, what we call OCR in the Department of Education, would investigate, because we weren't charged with enforcing Title VI, which prevents discrimination in education institutions on the basis of race. So we did that, and we also did that for what we call college-ready courses, because what we also found was that at a very negative rate, Black and brown students were not being admitted into those classes. Why am I talking about that in lead to Project 2025, right? Because in Project 2025, the proposal is to do away with the Department of Education, but particularly to take the Office of Civil Rights and close its doors and house it in the Department of Justice. And why that's a scary thing, having been someone who worked in that department, is because discrimination is done on a mass scale. The data and statistics I told you was happening all over this country. And the minute that President Trump took office, right, he took those policy guides that talked about the discrimination that was happening in the classroom, and he removed all of those mandates. And what he's asking for in his administration, not even Project 2025, is the same abolishment. And as someone who worked in the Department of Education under the Trump administration, let me tell you that he had already begun trying to do those things. Close the Department of Education, close the Office for Civil Rights, remove policy that examined whether or not discrimination occurred at a mass level against Black and brown and other students. So I know, because he did it before when he was president, and he began to remove those policies that gave that extra level of protection. When I hear him say what he's going to do now, I believe him. And so what we want to make sure you know is that this is not hyperbole. This is not a conspiracy theory. And you're going to learn tonight from all of these different organizers and activist scholars that Ryan is going to lead a discussion on, how this is going to come to pass in a way that may shock you, from closing, removing vital funding, right, to schools that house large numbers of Black and brown students, removing that vital funding, stop gathering statistics and data that shows the behavior and actions that school districts are taking the control and the money that goes to school and putting it back in the hands of state government. And if you and I are historians of civil rights, we know what state rights mean. Those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about tonight. And we're going to unpack this DEI thing that you've been hearing about, and whether or not, this ban on critical race theory really means anything. We got to know as a community so that when we're going to vote, we're informed about who we should be supporting, because policy and power is what it's about when we go to those polls. So Ryan, I'm turning it over to you to get us started in this robust discussion. It's going to be one for the book. So I hope that you are chiming in and that you stay engaged with us and ask questions, because we want to end tonight's session with you knowing about what's going on. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, April. Woo! It's a hard act to follow, y'all, but that is my fearless leader, our legal director, April Albright. I appreciate her for setting the table for us about Project 2025. BVM family, thank you for joining us tonight as well. We took a little break in July, but we are now rested and ready to go. We are back in full effect, and welcome to the third installment of our Policy Corner series. This evening, we are taking a closer look at the connections between Project 2025 and the coordinated attacks on our education system as a whole, beyond the DEI bans and censorship you might have heard of already. And for those of you who are new to this Project 2025 subject matter, we hope that you learn something from this as we move into the fall season. There's very important issue that I think our community should know about. We have a great panel set up for you tonight. I'm thrilled to introduce our panel of speakers who each bring their own critical perspectives and expertise to this conversation. Together, we will educate you on what Project 2025 is and explore the impact it will have on our communities. So without further ado, I want to welcome our esteemed guests, Anisha Hardy, the Executive Director of Alabama Values Progress, Marcus Bass, Executive Director of Advanced Carolina, and Quincy Bates, Power Coalition, and Reverend Rhonda Thomas, Executive Director of Faith in Florida. Thank you all for being here this evening. I know we are going to have a dynamic discussion tonight, so let's get into it. Anisha, I want to start us off with this question. It's for you. So in addition to Florida and Texas cutting up, Alabama is not one to be left behind. So how has this post-affirmative action landscape impacted Alabama, particularly in relationship to access to higher education for marginalized communities, particularly Black communities? Talk to me about what the long-term effects that you foresee taking place in Alabama and across the South, and how we can proactively address that.
Yeah, no, thank you. To your point, I was just talking to a colleague. Alabama didn't even let the ink dry, on the bill that was passed. For us, it was SB 129. That was our anti-DEI legislation. And so when we think about this post-affirmative action education environment in Alabama, I want to say that this is not just a regression. This is an outright assault on the hard-won victories and gains that, marginalized communities, particularly Black communities, have fought for over the decades. And so the recent anti-DEI laws have led to the closure of critical spaces like the Black Student Union and the Safe Zone Resource Center at the University of Alabama, turning these once vibrant, centers of support and community into empty, lifeless rooms. And these closures represent more than just a loss of physical space. I want to point that out, that they signify a calculated erasure of the very resources that were created to counteract the systemic racism, homophobia, and exclusion that have long plagued our educational institutions in our country. So let's be clear that the pushback against these spaces by groups whose ancestors' actions were the reasons that these spaces need to exist, I'm talking about systemic racism and the legacy of white supremacy. Like, we have to name that. These spaces existed because marginalized students, Black and brown students, LGBTQ plus students, and others needed sanctuaries where they could find support and safety, and a sense of belonging in environments that were often hostile or indifferent to their presence. And so, you see, the Black Student Union office wasn't just an office. It was a haven where students could connect with others that shared their lived experiences and struggles and triumphs. The Safe Zone Resource Center wasn't just a room. It was a place where LGBTQ plus students could, be themselves and be surrounded by symbols of pride and history. And so to dismantle these spaces now is to send a clear and chilling message that these states are willing to undo the progress made in diversifying and humanizing our educational system. And I use that, humanizing our educational system, because we talk about this issue as if we're just talking about a bill, like when I say SB 129, but these are people's lives, right? And so the impact of this rollback in our state is devastating and far-reaching. For example, Auburn University, the Office of Inclusion and Diversity, was closed, leaving behind a campus where Black students make up a mere, 5% of the population, a percentage that has been shrinking over the past decade. At the University of Alabama in Birmingham, organizations like the Esperanza, which was founded to improve retention rates among Hispanic students, are now struggling to find funding for essential events and programming that were once supported by the DEI offices. And then similarly, we have the Queer Student Association at the University of Alabama that has been left scrambling to fund events like Shantae UA, which people know about in our state, which provided crucial community building opportunities for LGBTQ students. And so these closures and funding cuts are not just bureaucratic adjustments. Like, I don't want us to look at it like that, right? They are systemic attempts to dismantle the very mechanisms that have enabled, marginalized communities to not only access higher education, but to thrive within it. And without these essential resources, these students are left to navigate an increasingly hostile environment without the support they need to succeed. We could expect a decline in retention and graduation rates among these students, further entrenching the racial and economic disparities that these DEI programs were created to address. And historically, the creation of these spaces was in response to this type of, exclusion and discrimination amongst these students. In these spaces, I think to see them dismantled so swiftly is a stark reminder of how fragile progress can be and how easily it can be undone, and that we must remain vigilant, y'all. That's why I often say, I just don't want my people to be free, but I want my people to be liberated. And liberation is freedom without constraints. And so we cannot afford to be passive in the face of all these attacks. I'm sure my other partners on the call are going to talk about it. But it's important that we advocate for the restoration and sustained protection of these spaces, and that, I'm calling on community organizations, alumni, and allies to step up to provide the support that, the state has stripped away. Legal challenges must be pursued to overturn these laws, and we must keep the stories of those affected at the forefront in the public discourse. I'll close on this. I want to quote my sister, the renowned scholar and intersectional feminist and poet Audre Lorde, that says, "Your silence will not protect you." And Lorde also said, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive." So this is just not about preserving DEI offices. It is about fighting for our educational institutions and ensuring that they remain places of opportunity and inclusion for all.
Anisha, you out here preaching a word, sis.
Well, say it again, because
listen. So in that vein, I want to open this next question up to the wider group. What are some key challenges that you're seeing to DEI beyond, say, the legislative bans, right? How are school boards being shaped by these measures and those impacts? School budgets, you got groups like Moms for Liberty getting involved with school boards and just really, for lack of a better word, causing chaos. So, Reverend Thomas, I want to go to you next with that question, and then we'll go, around Quincy, and then you, Marcus, to chime in.
Well, thanks, Ryan, and hello, everyone. Well, we know Florida has been at the forefront of all of these issues. There's nothing like bipolar Florida, who's not just known for our beaches and entertainment and food, but we just have a group of interesting legislators who have made life extremely challenging and difficult, quite unpleasant for our professors who no longer want to teach in Florida, as well as students who don't want to participate in a higher education area because of the hand they've been handed. Also, we see how just coming up this election is going to be on an amendment where we have to vote. Do we want to make school board seats partisan? And that has a lot to do with the Moms of Liberty. I'm so grateful that I was able to organize some Moms of Liberation so that next time them sisters want to show up in Miami-Dade County taking over a school board meeting, we have a nice treat for them. And so it's all about organizing and organizing parents, people who are concerned about our education system, as public education system as a whole. So even in the midst of it all, we can see some positive things that have just taken place in the state of Florida, because it was 11, our governor, well, the governor of Florida, he had designated different ones to run for different seats in the state of Florida, and we're blessed to say he lost 11 of those seats, because people who really cared about education, about how we are being impacted by DEI, that we're able to hold on for now. But still, a great fight is ahead of us.
Quincy, will you chime in?
Yep. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having myself representing Power Coalition. Getting rid of DEI programs attacks that layer of protection our schools and our institutions have, right? When we think about all of the initiatives and all the programs that are created and there are safe spaces for those students who are students of color, the LGBTQ students, just students who have those specific groups where they find a safe space, they find a group of people who look like them, who sound like them, who act like them. When you attack those programs, it just creates a hostile environment. And here in Louisiana, there was just a bill passed where now all the schools will have to report on all of the DEI initiatives that they have at the school, all of the programming, what type of funding that those programs are receiving, how many students are participating. And when you think about the layer of work and the amount of time that our administrators and the few teachers that we do have to put into preparing these reports, looking at how much funding, how much they're spending, it just takes away from the actual educational time that they have and the time that they're spending with these students in crafting their lives and helping them build. So it's just that layer of protection that the DEI had on our students, had on our institutions, is now being attacked, and it's just creating extremely hostile environments.
Brother Marcus, I'm about to ask you about what is going on at Duke University and University of North Carolina. What is wrong with them?
It is ridiculously timely that you all are having this conversation. BVM is in the midst of back to school, right? I think as our parents think about what it takes to make sure that our children are successful, as our teachers go in wondering whether or not they'll get a raise in pay or either a promotion based on the work that they put in, as individuals begin to think about the other professions that are around the school district in regards to the number of contracts that are given out at a local level, everybody that cuts the grass, anybody that paints a wall, changes a light bulb. These are $1 million institutions in rural communities across North Carolina. And for a long time, our rural residents, if we were really listening, have been telling us that something was in the water. They know that they had a right skill set. They knew that they had the right academic requirements to be able to do these jobs inside and outside of the classroom. But for a very long time, we saw a lack of diversity in those spaces. And I want to make sure I'm clear here too, because in North Carolina, sometimes we listen to these DEI words and we think that there's some fancy context behind that. I've talked to white and black voters here and individuals in the business community. They really think that DEI means giving somebody a job they don't deserve. So let's just sit with that. There are individuals right now that are against DEI because what they feel like is a white principal or a white teacher is not going to get a job because of a mandate by the federal government. We know by and large that DEI has nothing to do with putting a black person up over a white candidate or a person of color. We know that what DEI does, it levels the playing field of over 350 years of improper hiring practices, and particularly in our school systems. When we talk about Brown versus Board of Education, when we talk about the Dred Scott decision, these are laws that even though time has passed, we're still seeing in our rural communities the impact of plantation politics in our education system and our economical system. What we are seeing also are our Black elected officials being attacked. You asked, how could we sense or what could we tell was happening in North Carolina well before we actually saw the wave? The hurricane warning for DEI came during the mask mandates, when parents were going by droves into these rural school board meetings, demanding that the mask mandate be lifted in the midst of the peak seasons of COVID, of which we're coming out of or in the midst of now. And then also when you double that down by those same parents that were organized around anti-mask also somehow strangely came into this concept of we should be going into these same school board meetings talking about banning books. They are listening to an agenda that was just revealed this year. And it just had a name on it right now, Project 2025. But the roots we've seen from that tree for a number of years in rural education spaces and majority Black school districts across North Carolina. And I think it is great that we're having this conversation about really elevating and putting a name and a face to the experiences of what some rural Black constituents have seen in regards to the disparities in their education system. So that's just a little bit of what we've heard from our leaders on the ground in education and our folks in community that are concerned about whether or not their child is being properly educated in a school system that is supposed to constitutionally educate everyone based on the same standard of education. And we could talk about that later on in the conversation, but that's what we got at NC, Ryan.
Thank you, Brother Marcus. Also, apparently Duke and UNC are getting rid of their minority scholarships. So it's going all the way up the chain, apparently.
Sorry, they're getting rid of entire positions. These DEI departments in North Carolina, you're talking about 5 to 10 individuals in an entire department at the institution. Overnight, those positions were wiped away, and not everyone was saved and preserved on those campuses. So what we're seeing in the K through 12 system is only magnified in the system of higher education in North Carolina. We have 10 HBCUs, but we also have a number of predominantly white institutions that have a large population of color, and those individual Black students, brown students, they're in these DEI programs. They're receiving these scholarships, not because they need a handout, but because if we let a colorblind approach go into our academic achievement and scholarships, then a lot of these students will never be served by these institutions. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sorry we didn't get to the higher education piece, but we can talk about that whenever we come back to me.
Listen, we're having a good discussion already. So speaking of pervasive narratives, Anisha, what are some of these pervasive narratives and misinformation, disinformation surrounding DEI and Project 2025 are you seeing? Because Brother Marcus mentioned, there's a lot of folks out here that think DEI means I'm gonna just put a Black person above you and they're not qualified. We've had you hear DEI hire all over the place. So what are you seeing, and what approaches have you found effective in challenging those narratives to ensure that the truth is at the forefront for public discourse?
Yeah, let me tell you something. Misinfo and disinfo is probably one of the biggest threats to, underserved, underrepresented communities. When you create barriers to information, because knowledge is power, information is power. And so, the spread of misinfo and disinfo surrounding DEI and Project 2025 is deeply concerning. One of the most damaging narratives is the idea, like Marcus was saying, that DEI initiatives are somehow harmful or divisive rather than necessary measures to create equitable and inclusive environments. And then this narrative is often coupled with misleading claims that these initiatives promote reverse racism or are part of a broader woke agenda that threatens traditional values. And don't get me on what is truly meant by traditional values. And so, the narrative that DEI initiatives promote reverse racism or are part of a broader woke agenda that threatens traditional values is deeply misleading and harmful. The term reverse racism is often weaponized by opponents of DEI to suggest that the policies and programs designed to uplift, marginalized groups are somehow discriminatory against majority groups, particularly white people. And this argument not only misrepresents the purpose of DEI, but it also ignores the historical and ongoing systemic inequalities that exist. And then, labeling DEI as part of a woke agenda is an attempt to delegitimize these efforts, by framing them as, radical or extreme, and just how the term woke, which was originally rooted, in awareness of social injustices, has been co-opted by critics to paint a picture of DEI as this out of touch, politically motivated movement that is out to undermine traditional values. This framing is particularly effective in conservative areas where there's already a strong attachment to certain cultural norms, and where change, to those norms are often met with, resistance. And when we talk about portraying, this being a threat to traditional values, this narrative really taps into the deep-seated anxieties about social change that exists. The phrase traditional values is often used as a coded reference to American traditional values, which has historically been rooted in white supremacy. I'm gonna try to say that word at least 10 more times while we're on this call, because we got to bring that into the conversation. These American values rooted in white supremacy and male patriarchal structures, and this rhetoric, it really puts us back to a time when these norms were heavily skewed in favor of, white male dominant power structures. And so by framing DEI initiatives as a threat to the so-called traditional values, we are essentially, resisting efforts to dismantle, these entrenched systems of equality. And then, last, I do want to point out that the narrative that Project 2025's education reforms, particularly the push for universal school choice, as a positive expansion of educational freedom, this is deeply rooted in the legacy of white supremacy. While the language of school choice and educational freedom might appear neutral or even progressive on the surface, it masks, a history of policies and practices that have been designed to maintain racial and economic segregation within the educational system. Historically, school choice, has often been, employed as a tool to preserve white supremacy in education. After, Brown v. Board of Education decision, which mandated, the desegregation of public schools, many white families sought out to avoid integration. And one common response was the creation of private schools, which were referred to as segregation academies. This is why, history is so important. And this was established to provide white students with an alternative to attending integrated public schools. And this whole rhetoric of choice was used to justify these moves, framing them as a matter of parental rights and educational quality. These terms are still being used, right? Rather than as efforts to circumvent desegregation. So today, the push for universal school choice under Project 2025 is a continuation of this legacy. So by diverting, public funds to private schools through vouchers and other mechanisms, these reforms disproportionately, y'all, benefit those who are already privileged, often white, middle to upper class families, while leaving public schools, particularly in low income and minorities communities, with even fewer choices. And then this exacerbates the existing inequalities as public schools that are already underfunded and overstretched struggle to provide quality education, to students that rely, on this. And so, and I do want to just, kind of close out here, but many of the private schools that stand to benefit from these policies are not held to the same standards of accountability as public schools. They can set their own admission criteria, which can include selective enrollment practices, that effectively exclude low-income students, students of color, students with disabilities. These selective processes can further entrench segregation and inequality, as these schools can cater to a more affluent families, while public schools become the de facto option for those who come from underserved, communities. And so, to challenge this, it is essential for us to expose the roots of these policies and, in a history of segregation and inclusion. So, again, I always try to put in call to actions, calling on advocates for education, equality, to highlight how these so-called reforms serve to deepen divides rather than bridge them, and how true educational freedom can only be achieved when all students, regardless of their background, have equal access to quality education. And this means advocating for policies that strengthen rather than undermine, public schools. And so, I just want to, put that out there that, we must amplify the voices of those directly impacted by these policies. So students, parents, and educators, we got to humanize. When we think about narrative strategies, we got to humanize this issue and counter the abstract and often deceptive rhetoric, used by people who are opposing DEI. So fact-based messaging combined with emotional appeal can really cut through this noise and chatter that we're seeing and ensure that the truth remains at the forefront in public discourse.
You brought up school choice, which leads me to my next question. We all know that much of our education dollars tends to follow middle to upper middle class white kids. So one of the things in Project 2025, they specifically talk about Title I funding. So Quincy, can you talk to me about how Title I funding, those challenges are appearing in, particularly in Louisiana, and how would Project 2025 exacerbate these issues, and what are the potential consequences for schools and communities that rely on that Title I funding?
Yep. Over the past couple of years, Power Coalition, we did what we call, community listening sessions, where we spoke with so many families and homes about early childhood education. Right, we spoke to them about their needs and their the barriers that are in place. When you think about Title I and the funding that these schools rely on, and these Head Start, the pre-K programs, things like that rely on those funds, and for them to strip those at funding, is the schools are already overcrowded. They're already underfunded. They're in low income areas. These parents, they depend on Head Start. They depend on these pre-K programs so that they can send their students there so they can learn those basic skills that they need to prepare for grade school while their parents go to work, while their parents tend to other basic needs of the family before the kids come back home in the afternoon. Some of the things that we heard while we were out was, there's a lack of education on these, early childhood programs and things like that. And with Title I funding, once you strip that, then they won't know about it at all, right? And so just releasing those funds, taking those funds away, it's going to take away from from communities that rely on it so heavily, that rely on those Head Starts and early childhood programs. And it's frustrating to think, when you have Head Start and how much the students benefit from it, right? That's where you learn your basic skills. That's where you learn how to read. That's how you learn your social skills, and prepare you for grade school. Once we get rid of that, our students are already going to be behind. They're already going to be trying to catch up to their white counterparts, trying to catch up to those students who are in the private schools, that are in the schools that are receiving those necessary funds. There was just a bill that was passed in Louisiana recently to take money away from public schools to start funding private schools, because the private schools need better schools. They need better buildings. They need more books and better technology. And the public schools don't necessarily need it. If they don't want to get it there, they could just go to the private school. We all know they can't afford the private school, right? So getting rid of those Title I schools are going to take away from much needed education, especially for our low income students.
Quincy, are you seeing the same sort of teacher shortages that we were seeing in Florida? These early retirements as well?
Retirements, running away from the school system period, the education system period, right? When there's a lack of funding. I just was speaking to a principal who we were trying to do some voter registration at the school, and he basically was like, we don't have time to focus on voter registration because I'm trying to keep my teachers. I'm trying to keep them in the classroom. I'm trying to make sure that they have what they need to do their basic job, right? They're not worrying about all the other added and extracurricular activities because they're already struggling with their basic needs. So just getting rid of any type of funding, right? It's taken away from our teachers. It's taken away from the basic needs in the school. Teachers are running. I've seen it not only just in Louisiana, but in Texas. I've seen teachers are running away from the school because it's just, it's hard, right? It's hard with no funding, lack of support from your legislators, lack of support from the federal government. So yeah, we are definitely seeing that here in Louisiana as well.
Reverend Thomas, speaking of school and curriculum and all the things, I want to touch on, you developed a curriculum to counter Florida's ban on Black history. Can you share how this curriculum has been received, the impact it's having on the students and educators, what lessons can other states learn from your experience? They might already be modeling your curriculum you develop. I really want you to shout it out to our viewers, because I know that I didn't know that you created this curriculum to fight back. For those that don't know, the governor of Florida decided that in order to make white kids comfortable, it was prudent to ban Black history, any Black history before 1970. So take it away, Reverend Thomas.
Yes, the interesting governor in Florida chose to do something once again, something that irritated Black folks, not just Black folks, but we reached out to the Board of Education in the state of Florida to set up a meeting with faith leaders and himself along with his staff. And we scheduled 2 different meetings, one in Tallahassee, where the Capitol is, as well as in Miami Gardens. And he stood us up both times. And so me being me, don't like to be stood up. And that's when, because we have congregations, Faith in Florida is in 40 counties in the state of Florida, 67 counties at whole. So we're in 40 counties organizing. And so we have over 900 congregations that's already a part of, because we're a faith-based organization. So we said, well, if we could get 500 congregations, we created a toolkit. And if we could get 500 congregations to teach African-American history, Black history, we didn't get a response. So we were what we decided is that we would take those lemons and turn it into lemonade. They should have left our public school system, our teachers, our educators, they should have left them alone and allowed them to operate in their profession, to teach it in a way that it would not offend any children. Because if the truth be told, Black children have been offended for years, and no one changed anything to accommodate us. So we decided, our churches, that we would teach African-American history, but we would teach it raw and we would teach it real. We would teach it from biblical principles. We have history that still lies in our pews. So after, our goal was 500 congregations, it exploded. That even white churches start signing on to say, we can't teach it like the Black church, but we can teach it in a way of accountability. And so our white churches, they start signing on teaching Black history in a way of accountability. Then 29 additional states found out about what was going on with the supposedly diluting teaching of Black history in our public school system. So now Faith in Florida, besides our 500 congregations in the state, we have 29 additional states that has picked up our toolkit. We didn't do a curriculum, but we chose a toolkit because we designed the toolkit where the teaching can be not just for children, but adults as well. And so just to use an example, you know how many folks have been in church forever and had no idea King James, who they often study from, was and owned slaves. And so that was alarming to even some of our Black clergy who often taught from the King James Version and had no idea that King James owned slaves. So the teaching, it exploded. The curriculum, the toolkit exploded. It's still exploding. I now have more Gen Zs and millennials that's a part and also teaching Black history as well. Our Black history classes are now larger than some of our Bible classes because of the way it's being taught. And so with our Gen Zs being a part, they're already saying that in the way that they're learning, they see they're definitely not like us. So this is just one of the positive things that the Black church is owning and doing. It's unfortunate that they took Black history out of public schools and added teaching communism from first grade all the way up to the 12th grade. So that's why. So all the books that they banned, our churches created libraries. So many of those books is now in the church. And so that's what we're going to do. And that's what we're doing across the state and in the additional 29 other states.
So my next question, again, Reverend Thomas, I want to get a sense of how do you perceive the role of faith-based organizations in addressing what's happening with Project 2025, particularly around DEI, and what are some of those unique contributions faith community can bring? Like, we all know the historical context in which the Black church has served in moving the Black community forward in terms of civil rights. What's that look like now in 2024?
Well, and we're about to launch this right after Labor Day, where, now the churches, we used to own Sunday, but now we share it with the NFL, NBA, Little League, Jazz in the Guard, all. We're just doing a lot of sharing right about now. But what we are owning, and we're about to launch the teaching of Project 2025 using some biblical principles, because none of this is new. This has been going on since before slavery and the Old Testament. So we have not alone just teaching what Project 2025 is and how we're impacted, because if Project 2025 impacts anyone's personal lifestyle, it automatically impacts the church. You messing with someone's Social Security, and that's their only lively way of living, that impacts the church. Healthcare, anything all of it still impacts the church. So we're doing town hall meetings, community meetings, and we're educating not just those that's in the church, but those that's under the tree and in the strip clubs. We'll meet people where they are and sharing this message. So Faith in Florida banner is everywhere. I'm not the traditional pastor, and we don't run anything traditional anyway. And besides, it's Florida. How can you be traditional, right? So our churches is really, really owning, making sure that as many people as possible are getting a understanding of what Project 2025 is, in a way of how do we bring change and how do we fight back, as well as how do we educate. So, next time y'all in Florida,
have a couple of questions.
Well, you got to come to South Florida. Yeah, you got to come all the way to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, I'll take you up on that, Reverend Thomas, next time I'm in Florida.
All right.
So we have 2 questions from the audience. Anyone can chime in. What are the best tactics to not just prevent Project 2020? I think they meant Project 2025, but to affirmatively install liberating policies?
I just want to say we got to get proactive. I think that's a great question. And not saying where is our version of Project 2025, but I guess I'm saying that, Project 2025 is not a sudden development. It did not just pop up out of nowhere. This is a continuation of a long established conservative strategy that is deeply rooted in the Southern strategy of the 60s that, ultimately aimed to shift the political allegiance and ideology of the South after the Civil Rights Movement by exploiting the racial tensions that exist. And this was a tactic that helped, a conservative party gain significant control in the South. And we are seeing echoes of this approach in some of the things that are mentioned in Project 2025. Some of Project 2025, we are seeing the impact of some of those policies that have been implemented across the South where these states have these super majorities where the state legislative, house is overwhelmingly controlled by a conservative, party. And so I want to point out that it is Project 2025 is if you go to their site, it is a mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. And it is a product of more than 400 scholars and policy experts from around the country. So I make that point to say that we have thought leaders in our spaces that are pushing, that have that are aligned with pro-democracy values and policies. And it is going to take a collective effort on a local level, a state level, and a regional level for us to sit down and not only talk about how to counter some of the impacts of Project 2025, but how do we prevent it from further being implemented? And I think when we talk about installing liberating policies, like we have to begin to advocate for like those policies that are values aligned with, those liberating policies. And I'm not saying that that's not happening, but when I look at the intentionality around, like when I go to the site, and I don't know if I'm almost finished reading the 922-page mandate. Like that is the type of proactive strategies that we have to start really unifying around as a movement.
I'll just add, Ryan, to that very quickly. We have to realize also, a lot of people asked in the immediate kind of outset of Project 2025, where's our Project 2025? Where were you when we were trying to pass the John Lewis, Voting Rights Act? Where were you when we were trying to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act? There is this connotation, even when we talk about immigration, folks are saying that people are trying to take jobs. We've been creating these jobs. We've been creating these policies, and it's not disconnected from the protest element of folks that have been lifting up policies over the past decade. And so in a very real way, I think the biggest hope we can provide around solutions are listening to the individuals that have been in the streets, that have been talking about these issues that are directly impacted. And then also, too, the second piece is this. Project 2025 was well funded. How many times have we come up with proposals and individuals of wealth and philanthropy and different donor spaces will reject our policy proposals? And without question, I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that while we've have had policies at the federal level that have not necessarily seen the light of day, we've also not seen the nonprofit community stand up for some of these Black policy areas and scaffold them the way they properly should. So I don't want to, completely give the blame to one particular area. When I think when we look at the investment overall of policy discussions in this country, there's an undermining and underfunding of the policies that we're already creating naturally in our audience spaces. So find those pieces and affirmatively lift those up in your backyards, because Project 2025 is not just a federal mandate, but there are things that are happening locally down ballot that we can make sure we can beat Project 2025 out the gate, even in areas that have been oppressed historically.
There's also something to be said when people say, where's ours? This thing was well thought out and well planned, right? It like Anisha said, it didn't just pop up, right? Like, so there's this, on the flip side, folks need to really be thinking that do this work, really need to think about future proofing, right? Sometimes I know it gets busy during any given election season. We just trying to triage and react to whatever's going on. But it's at the core of it, Project 2025 was a well thought out future proof plan, right? They scenario planned all the things. It was like a war game almost. So this next question says, what structures are we building now in anticipation of losing Title I funds? They are not just contingent on a Republican president or Project 2025.
I think that piece about Black church Head Start programs need to come back. Like, how do we start thinking about that? And I think Pastor Rhonda, Reverend Rhonda, that your example of you being, stood up twice. It was like, you know what? We're going to create structures that can counter and can operate outside of that. And I think that is a beautiful illustration of how we are empowered. We are not powerless in this fight. And so tapping more into that, asking that question, but also having solution-oriented conversations with everyday people. If I'm being honest, y'all, real change, systemic change, transformational change in our country has happened when everyday people said enough is enough and got together and did something.
That's right.
So, even folks that are tuning in right now, you all are also empowered to, I think that's a great idea. The Black Church Head Start program. Like, I'm loving this.
How do we start it in the Black church, right?
Yes, like,
start with those retired teachers that want to come back, that want to continue to instill education in those young children, that we start programs there. We start a few hours every day in Black churches, right? In the small Black churches, big Black churches, all the Black churches. You say, well, let's start with our own resources. Let's start at home and then branch out from there.
Yeah.
Those banned book lists that I'm seeing that some of these educators are posting, they're just little ways that we can really fight back and be bold. So, well, we are almost at the end. So I want everybody to also shout out how our viewers can follow you on social media, just so that they can keep up not only with what we talked about tonight, but the work that you're doing.
Reverend Rhonda Thomas, did you want to kick us off? Because I know you're getting ready to say something.
No, I was just going to say, even our HBCUs, many of them were started in the Black church. So to start our little people back, to take them back to the Black church is just a plus. So, yeah, you can follow me on faithinflorida.org, and we're on every social media outlet. Just pull up Faith in Florida.
Yeah.
All 40 counties.
Yeah. Well, you can tap into the work of Alabama Values Progress by following us at alvalues.org and alabamavaluesprogress.org. Also, check us out on YouTube. We are constantly amplifying voices and telling stories. We leverage culture, media, and content to raise awareness around issues, close the knowledge gap, and mobilize communities. We're on all social media channels as well. So Google us. We're out there. And, we would love to collaborate with folks in the wider community. So
I'll jump in, Ryan, real quick. I see a lot of folks still talking in the chat. Don't let the conversation stop now. Host a Project 2025 conversation at your house. These questions that you're asking, folks have answers to, and people just want to know. So don't feel like you have to have, 30,000 people in a live stream. You can have 5 people in your backyard. And I challenge you to do that as we approach the election at every single turn in this election cycle. You can find us at advancedcarolina.org. You can find us also on all social media at Advanced Carolina, Advanced North Carolina, and also safevoternc.com is the site that we give Black voters relevant information broken down from the State Board of Elections in a way that they can digest it and share it. And so you can follow us in all of those places, Advanced North Carolina or North Carolina Black Alliance.
Yep. And for Power Coalition, you can follow us at powercoalition.org. There you can find all kind of reports and all types of resources and things that we've put together. A lot talks about early childhood education, talks about Head Start and things like that. So you can really find some great information there. But you can follow us also on socials at PowerCoEJ. That's POWERCOEJ. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. You can follow us there. Come join us. Come talk to us. We're ready to do some work. We're ready to tap in.
So that concludes tonight's programming. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We had a dynamic discussion. I hope to continue those offline as well with you all. Thank you all for all that you do in the communities in your respective states. I want to shout out our fearless leader, April Albright, our legal director, for setting the table for us, setting the stage. And you can follow Black Voters Matter on all social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, just to tap into the work that we are doing as well. So again, thank you all and have a great evening. Bye, family, BVM family.
all right.